if you chop a big crop of straw and you turn around to try and establish a winter crop immediately, especially if you're coming from the likes of winter wheat into winter oilseed rape or something like that, with a very small window in between, seedbed consolidation and slugs can be an issue, and it's just something that has to be worked on, that you have to prepare it.
It must be said that all farmers, especially tillage farmers, should have our full admiration for dealing with the complexities of farming. Not only the physical side of the house, but also ensuring compliance with various rules and also managing to make a living at the same time. Farming is a complex business, and changing the business for yet new demands generally doesn't make farming any simpler. You're listening to the latest episode of The Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We would really appreciate it if you could listen, follow and give us a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from. Last week, Teagasc held a very informative farm walk on Don Summers' farm in Wexford. Don is a tillage signpost farmer and is leading the way in taking the complexity within farming and putting it into practice on his farm. Over the coming weeks, I will talk to researchers, advisors and Don himself who attended the walk on how the practices on Don's farm is helping the environment and also Don's bottom line. You'll hear from Pat Power, a tillage advisor in Wexford, to talk about straw incorporation on Don's farm. But first I talked to Dr. David Wall, a Teagasc researcher in Johnstown, about the soils on Don's farm and how the management of these soils is helping Don to maintain yields. I began by asking David about the soils on Don's farm in particular.
We're here, Michael, in a Clonroach type soil. So for everybody, that's a soil with I suppose moderate clay. It's free draining soil over shale, so the nutrients, etc., water, etc., can get away. What we're looking here, so Don has been using a minimum tillage type operation for the last while. He's given up the plough, and you can see in the plough layer, etc., there's good structure, number one. So plenty of organic matter being returned, it's maintaining the organic matter and the structure is built up, so fairly resilient.
I seen you, David, pushing a knife in there earlier down along the soil profile. In doing that, you think it's still free enough? It still doesn't need to be pushed up with a plough or anything?
Certainly, this is a kind soil, you could say, in terms of Wexford soils, as the thing goes. But the knife goes in without too much force. Plenty of evidence there for cracking aggregates, so the soil aggregates themselves are formed there, and the roots are exploring the whole depth.
Roots are all there,
The other thing that Don is doing is he's using control tram lines, control traffic. So he's using his tram lines for nearly all his operations. Even, funny enough, we went digging here and he even drove the digger along the headland rather than going straight across the field at an angle to come up the tram line, and you can see there we've dug it across the tram line there as well. So
and the tram line is a bit compacted as you were saying.
It is,
there.
yeah. No,
is it fairly localised?
Not too bad. It's localised within the top, I suppose, foot, or the top 30 centimetres. Underneath that is fine. So even the tram lines are not going to bog up here, but it is compacted. There's no two ways about it with the heavy traffic.
But he'll be coming back to that same spot again.
But he'll be coming back, so he's not going to remediate that. There's no need to remediate that. And, even his bottom headland, we were looking at that yesterday, everything is stuck, drawn out grain, bales, the whole lot. It all comes out on the tram line, and you go left or right of that tram line, even on the bottom headland, and there's no problem. Soil is good. Other big things, I suppose, that you can see the soil organic matter or the soil carbon, very topical issue at the moment in terms of things like carbon farming coming along down the road. This system here is you can see there's stubble, but he's religiously putting in cover crops, and you can see that in the soil there. There's plenty of root matter. And leading to replenishing his soil organic matter.
And a cover crop we have in front of us here, I see there's a bit of vetch, there's a bit of phacelia, there's some rape of some sort on it as well, and there might even be a bit of clover there as well, along with the volunteers as well. So that'll create how important is that in terms of getting that in early or late?
Look, it's critical that it goes in as early as possible. It's like any young crop. If you put it in, getting more into the winter, so into October or even late September, it's not going to grow as much. Therefore, you don't have as big a crop and you don't have as big root mass underneath it. So it can't do a lot for you if it's going in late. If you can get it in, look, at this is a challenging harvest this year with the weather and everything else. But of a more normal year, trying to get it in there as early as possible, the first couple of weeks of September would be really key.
Yeah,
or pushing it back into August if you're after winter barley or something like that.
This very much looks like a crop in sown in August, and I think Richie Hackett would have shown that the bigger biomass comes from an August or even early August sown kind of crop.
Yeah, no, and look at if your rotation suits that. The other thing I suppose that Don is selecting here cover crops that suit his rotation. You know, if you're oilseed rape in the rotation and you have brassicas in there, you would probably want to avoid those a little bit and go with something else. So there are options out there.
And of course we're in the Slaney catchment area here in terms of the nitrates issues. How good does these cover crops gather up the
probably
free nitrogen?
Michael, the most effective I would say a mitigation or mop-up tool that you have in the bag. Cover cropping, we've shown religiously that you can take up more than probably 50 kilograms, 40 to 50 kilograms if you get it in early. So this goes back to the early cover crop, a big vigorous growing crop there coming into the winter. That nitrate in particular is typically lost once leaching starts, and it takes a bit of time for the soil to wet up. This is even a year where leaching hasn't started yet, despite all the rain. But come the third week of October, first week of November, anything that's left there below the root layer will be gone, will be flushed out. So cover cropping, getting it in early, mopping up that nutrients, even in a year like last year where there was a mini drought when cover crops would have been going in, we still took up between 30 and 40 kilograms per hectare of nitrogen.
So it's the number one solution.
It is, yeah, for sure.
David, come across here just in terms of, you have here in front of us, just to describe to people, there's kind of an open, big, large drainage pipe, and there's a couple of profiles of soil on both sides, and one you have down as a well-drained soil and one you have down as a poorly drained soil. And the poorly drained soil, in terms of how it looks like plasticine to a fair degree, and the one that's well-drained looks fairly sandy, at least to me. You might describe a little bit about what you're trying to show here.
Okay, so in terms of these two soils, we're showing the contrast, as you said, the very well drained sandy soil versus the clay-rich, poorly drained soil, and how you might manage these. So obviously the poorly drained soil with that clay, as you mentioned, plasticine is a great analogy because it's sticky. It's sticky now after the rain last night, but when we took that profile out of a field here next door, the water was beginning to pond under the wheels of the digger when we were taking it out. So again, the drainage is not going to go through that soil. It's less risky in terms of nitrate leaching, and probably more risky in terms of stuff coming off in the overflow.
I even see a bit of grey here towards the bottom end of that profile. That's a bit of grey marley kind of stuff, or is that just
grey
clay?
marley. So basically the water table, that indicates that the permanent water table is down probably 40-45 centimetres underneath that soil. So as Don says, that's his winter cropping type scenario. He tries to get winter crops in there because it takes too long to dry out in the spring, and it's probably, if he's putting in crops in the spring, it's late March into April before he can work that soil properly.
And that's a big contrast to everything we were talking about in the soil pit, which is a Clonroach soil. This is not Clonroach necessarily.
No. So this is a glaisol, more akin to a Rattangan type soil that we have a lot in the south of Wexford. The other soil then is
the well-drained soil.
Is more akin to a screen soil. Anybody locally that knows the screen soil, it's basically very, very sandy. You know,
it just crumbles. It crumbles in your hand. It's almost like taking up a big handful of sand almost.
Yeah, very hard. You know, talking with Don even yesterday, it's very hard to maintain a good supply of moisture in this soil.
Okay, dries out fast.
So dries out fast. That's an issue for him. I suppose maintaining the organic matter in this is really, really important to hold on to that moisture, to give you some little bit of resilience there in the height of the summer in this. But on the other side of that, very risky in terms of nutrient leaching. You know, it'll fly through it once it begins to rain. So building organic matter, he's on a no-till system. It suits this soil, but ultimately, you know, contrasting soils need to be managed. I suppose soil-specific management and knowing your soils across your farm is key.
David, thanks very much for that. I see a huge, great big group of farmers coming at you, so you're going to have to keep talking. Thanks very much, David.
No bother. Thanks, Michael.
Let's hear from Pat Power, a tillage advisor in Wexford, about Strohan Corporation.
On Don's farm here, he practices a lot of straw incorporation. He has done for a number of years, especially on crops where straw would have been of minimal value, like oats, oilseed rape, beans. They've all been chopped. But since the straw chopping scheme has come in 2 years ago, he's increased that quite significantly, and now chops an average of 53% of the farm every year, which is quite a lot of straw incorporation. And I suppose there's a couple of different reasons for that. It works twofold. You have the carbon sequestration point of view, which obviously is to the fore at the moment in battling climate change, of which straw incorporation is very important. But it's also providing nutrients back to the farm as well, back to the ground where he's taking it off, because he doesn't have any livestock or anything like that. So any straw that is sold is all exported off the farm.
And when you talk about those nutrients, see just behind us on the board here, you have those kind of categorised out. Say the big ones down here. So we're in Wexford. Spring barley's a big crop down here. What sort of nutrient return from, or nutrient saving, I suppose, or not exporting, whichever you like to call it, do you have from some of the kind of key crops there?
The amount of nutrients being returned back to the ground off a standard 7.5 tonne per hectare crop of spring barley is not huge in phosphorus. It's only around 2 kilos per hectare. But you do have quite a lot of potassium in your straw, and you'll be looking at around 50 kilos per hectare for that, which can result in quite a saving, and over time maybe even different types of compounds being used on the farm.
And would any of those figures be a little bit bigger in some of the other crops?
They would, of course. If you moved there to the likes of your winter wheat, you would have double the potassium being returned, or maybe a little with it even.
And winter oats is a big one as well.
Winter oats, then the difference would be you would have half that again in potassium as well. You'd be up on 75 kilos per hectare of potassium being returned, which would be a huge benefit.
And of course, farmers, especially Don is no different than anybody else, likes the convenience of it, but of course it doesn't have all upsides. Is there any downsides to straw incorporation? Or
there can be some management issues with straw incorporation, and it just has to be done correctly. If you chop a big crop of straw and you turn around to try and establish a winter crop immediately, especially if you're coming from the likes of winter wheat into winter oilseed rape or something like that, with a very small window in between, seedbed consolidation and slugs can be an issue, and it's just something that has to be worked on, that you have to prepare it. It can be a bigger issue here on Don's farm because he's all minimum tillage. If you're ploughing down that straw, it's easier to get your seed beds finer, but it can be quite fluffy and quite hard to consolidate without that.
And how does Don work through that?
He presses and then rolls after sowing.
Okay, so it's almost like a double consolidation scenario going on.
Yeah.
Okay. And in terms of is there any benefit in terms of nitrogen reduction in later crops, or does it soak up nitrogen maybe on the other side of it?
It certainly does. There's a figure there, 37 kilograms per hectare, that's been basically taken in by the microbes in the soil in order to break down the straw, because it's a high lignin, low nitrogen material. So the microbes actually take in nitrogen in order to break it down. And that can be very beneficial over the winter, where you're overwintering the soil for a spring crop, because that's soaking up that nitrogen and making it safe. And it is very slow to release back, but it does get released back. And if you're incorporating straw over a number of years, that cycle you tend to get that release every year as opposed to from the first year.
Okay, and of course that's a part of the new MAC up there as well, in terms of helping out from a tillage farmer to get down closer to carbon zero or carbon neutral, I suppose.
It is. You're sequestering carbon into the soil, and there is a figure there of just over 1 tonne of carbon equivalents per hectare being sequestered into the soil each year with that.
Which is quite significant considering it's the overall output, as we know it from tillage farms, is only a little over 1.3 or thereabouts.
It is, it's very significant, and as you say, it's bringing them very close down to that carbon neutrality point.
That's brilliant, Pat. Thanks very much for your time.
No problem, thanks Michael.
So that's it for this week, and my thanks to Pat and David for joining me on the show. Next week we'll chat to a number of advisors who are at the farm walk about Don's use of cover crops and also his extensive use of organic manures on the farm. So finally, don't forget, if you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy, thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.